Poverty is beyond just being broke. I fully subscribe to this idea. We've seen this with people who win the lottery. They've got millions of dollars, millions of rands in their bank account. And 5 years later, they're back to square one, or even worse than they were before. Because they were poor. They were never rich. They just had a lot of money at their bank unexpectedly. But then they were never rich. They were never wealthy because their mindset had not been transformed. True wealth is adding value to your mind, adding value to your identity. It's you. You are the wealth. You see this a lot also in athletes, musicians, people who tend to have a background, not so much in how the finance system works, how taxation works, how government systems work, and the loopholes therein, and how to actually take advantage and manipulate the system to optimize your well-being. People don't have really strong foundational understanding in terms of that, and who are not invested in knowing more about that. You tend to see that, they go and have an amazing career in sports, whether they do American football or actual football, or they go in basketball, or they Olympic athletes, medalists, gold medalists. You see that after they retire a few years later, that some of them they were actors. Even now, they are working in pizza places, they are working in pizza joints, they are working in fast food restaurants, because they didn't really, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes they didn't really have a systemic understanding of how things work and how things can work for them. And it's sad because I think that speaks a lot to poverty. Poverty is deeper than just your bank account balance. You can have a lot of money and still be very poor. A lot of people have a lot of money and they are very poor because poor people think money is for consumption. They think money is for buying. This is trading. This is not buying. You trade. You give something that you've perceived to be of equivalent value, and you get something, or you give what you're willing to give for something of a value you're willing to receive for what you give. But I think a lot of people just look at it from the surface, like, look, I've got money now. You see, the first thing they buy is an expensive car. Already that tells you that they're not concerned about transport. They're concerned about being perceived as having money. And then they buy a lot of consumables like nice clothes, branded clothes, very ugly actually. They'll buy like a Louis Vuitton thing with LV all over. Like, it looks dirty. But then they love it. So I'm not going to comment on that. They are walking billboard for these brands and all that. And then they will go and buy, with brands like beverages with exorbitant prices, like Dom Perignon and all that, which is not a problem. I'm not really going to get into that. All I'm saying is they tend to be more on the buying side. That's what I mean. Poor people tend to be more on the buying side, whereas wealthy people create systems to maintain, to preserve, and to multiply. Poor people consume what's created by wealthy people. Two different mindsets. So it's the mind that determines the level of poverty or wealth. It's not the bank account balance. Now, to get out of poverty obviously would require a radical process, a radical project of consistent stretching of oneself, and obviously availing yourself to learn from people who have already been in the system, who understand how the system works. So it will also require a level of humility, but also a level of intelligent observation. You have to be able to observe and understand and learn and take risks. You see this when Japan came after the World War II, when Japan wanted to rebuild the country, they needed to change the people's mindset so that the people would focus on building. So what Japan did, they came up with this project of actually programming people to believe that the more you work, you are serving your country. The more you work, you are building your country. And Japan had this very strong building, very strong working culture to this day, to such a point that out of the culture itself came out niche markets. But Japan worked so hard. It's a first world country according to the standards of modern day, which I have another view on them. But for the conversation's sake, Japan is a first world country with a lot of development, and we're only looking at these parameters. We're not going to look at the social aspect of things. No. Looking at the economic aspect and the wealth and the culture of working in the country. And the culture is so strong that even to this day, people work so hard in Japan that new niche markets formed. For example, in the accommodation industry or real estate industry, there's this thing called pod hotels in Japan, where people go and sleep in a pod. It's literally a place for sleeping only. It's not even a room. It's just a little bit of space, a chamber where you can go and sleep. Because people work so hard. It's 11:30 at night. You need to sleep because you need to wake up at 3 a.m. tomorrow, go to this very important meeting, and there's an acquisition that's going to take place. And you need to sleep right now. You can't go back home. Book a pod for the night. You wake up, man, I can't wear the same box. I can't wear the same underwear, underpant. You go to a 7-Eleven. They have underwears in their 7-Elevens, which is something strange for a lot of countries like South Africa, the USA. You don't really find underwears there. You find convenience goods, but it came out because of the working culture. But then what this working culture did, it built the country into a place of abundance and not a place of poverty. Obviously, there is poverty, but it's not the norm, it's the exception. What China did, according to official documents, they uplifted 600 million people out of poverty in 20 years. 600 million out of poverty in 20 years. And obviously, they measure poverty in another way. For me, poverty is the mindset, just like wealth is the mindset, because everything else after that is all about just learning and time. But then if they would manage to build a system that will uplift people out of poverty to 600 million people out of poverty, that's 6 times the number of the size of South Africa, actually, out of poverty in 20 years. What's stopping these other countries from uplifting their citizens from actual poverty of the mind and actual poverty in the financial sense? It's because it's hard. It's very hard to get out of poverty when all you've known is poverty and scarcity. It's really hard. You need to undo a lot of work. You need to undo a lot of stuff, and you need to construct a new reality in a very concerted effort, in a very, intense program. You need to transform yourself. And for governments, it's easier to keep people in poverty. Hence, social grants. Hence, social credit. Just get something from the government, stop bothering the government, let them plunder the money, let them steal the resources, let them be the wealthy ones and stay poor. And people think, this is such a nice government, they're giving us money. No! They're avoiding actually doing what they're supposed to do. You see this in Japan in the quality of exports that they produce. I'm not even talking about actual products, but the companies that have come out of Japan, like Toyota, Suzuki, Yamaha, and the quality of what they offer to the world speaks for itself. They not only produce physical items, but they produce systems. Many companies outside of Japan, outside of Asia, have started to copy those systems. The concept of Kaizen from Japan, Kaizen, meaning good change, continuous improvement. Toyota used a lot of that in their systems. The whole concept of lean, which means less effort and being more effective with less effort, which means optimizing your systems. Toyota employ a lot of lean methodologies in their processes. They even have a book, the Toyota Way into Lean Leadership. They literally have multiple concepts, a lot of them named in Japanese. You have the Gemba, which is the concept about actually being there in the physical place and actually seeing the actual work being done. And many other processes that speak to, units and the whole and synchronicity, synchrony between the two, the smaller and the bigger picture. These are processes and systems that were built from a country that had devastating, involvement in the war. I mean, the country was bombed by the USA, Nagasaki and Hiroshima. We know about that. But then they've managed to build themselves from that, and that's an abundance mindset, because they saw before it actually happened. They saw it, and then they created and devised a program to program every single thing to agree and move towards that vision. You see the same thing in places like Singapore. Singapore was merely like Zambia 40 years ago in the same level, but then now they're like they've multiplied, you see. So I think that's why it's easier for many governments to just give their citizens social grants, to just pacify them. It's just a pacifier to keep them quiet, stop talking, stop bothering us. But then poverty, that's the thing with poverty. You can have money and access to money and resources now, but then if you don't understand the value system and how valuable being in a particular environment is compared to having a particular amount of money, you will not make the right choices. I always say this, you see, in South Africa, A lot of people, it's still that whole thing of going to university is still very strong. And I understand because South Africa has a unique history where a certain group of people, where black people were put in a certain environment away from all resources. So they were put away from all resources, specifically because they are black. So they would be outside of the city, and then all white people will be closer to the city, closer to the resources. So a lot of black South Africans, even young ones, they grew up not really accessing certain resources. So I think university provides a unique opportunity for some of these people, even the ones who come from like rural areas. They have a unique opportunity at university with the access to resources that they have. That's how I see it. I don't see university as a place that's going to help them get a job because it's not going to happen. But the access, even for myself, when I went there, I knew that the access was everything. Because you will have access 24/7 to internet, firstly, unlimited internet. But you'll have access to resources such as books, access to resources, organizations to join and become part of, events, dialogues. You meet people. Imagine you're there for 4 years. You can literally become a completely different person from that boy, 16-year-old boy, 17-year-old boy who left his home when they finished grade 12. And I understood it from that perspective. Hence, I was so involved. I led different student societies. I was involved in student societies, public dialogues, book launch sessions. I was involved in a lot of debates because I realized that, you know what, I'm not here so that I could get a job. I'm here so that I could become more. And I became more. So now when you become more, it increases your prospects. It really makes it better for you when you leave and when you go into the work market or into business. You already are better. You're already a leader. You just have to build on top of that. That's perspective. That's poverty versus abundance. Poor people feel like, I'm going to university, I'm going to get a good job after that, which is probably not going to happen in this day and age. It's obviously not going to happen for majority of human beings. It's not going to happen because even majority of people at universities are not doing any degree that's actually going to give them a job. I mean, you go out there and you do public relations. Who's going to give you a good job with a public relations degree? Be honest with yourself. You're not going to get a good job. You can get a job, but it's not going to be a good job. It's going to be some crumbs there. Maybe with a degree in, in financial investments, and then you get the charter then from the Chartered Financial Institute, then you may be a very competitive person in the market. With a degree in accounting, and then you go and get your charter, whether it's chartered accounting, or it's chartered management accounting.